Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on avoiding the common pitfalls and successfully implementing IATF 16949. My name is Holly Cardozo. I'm a member of the marketing team with SAI Global, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today. Before we begin, I'll just speak to a few housekeeping slides. Firstly, you'll notice that upon entry, you're automatically muted. This is intentional. Should you wish to ask a question during the webinar, I encourage you to do so. As you think of them, you can click on the three small arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You can type in your question, submit to me. We can review them, and we'll speak to as many of these as the end of the webinar as we'll have time to. To collapse that box off to the right of the screen, just simply click those three small arrows a second time. We'll record the webinar today and share a link to the recording as well as the webinar slides. So you'll receive that within about 2 business days from today. So our presenter today is Dushan. Dushan is a technical manager for our automotive program at SAI Global. He's responsible for the recognition of the certification body, IATF certification scheme. He's a lead auditor, has a wealth of information experience in a variety of roles within the automotive sector, and I'm very pleased to welcome him today. So Dushan, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you, Holly. Good afternoon, everybody. You can hear me from London, Ontario. Welcome to this webinar. Just a few words. I've been with SAI Global just over 2 years, and I come from automotive industry. And I have worked in different roles in automotive industry, so I do have a lot of experience with IATF and customer-specific requirements and so on. So what we're going to do today is review the 12 non-conformances that are most frequently raised in automotive IATF audits. I'm going to basically share with you, my experience with them. I'm going to tell you or point to specifics that are basically coming from IATF. And at the end of the slides or at the end of the presentation, we can address those in several questions and answers. So the first one is we're going to go from the least frequent to the most frequent. So number 12 on the top list, let's call it that way, is the management review input. So 9321. Basically, this clause has been changed, or it was enhanced from ISO TS 6949 to include cost of poor quality first, process effectiveness, efficiency, the product conformance, feasibility assessments, customer satisfaction, performance against maintenance objectives, warranty performance, that's very often missed, potential field failures, that is also very often missed, of course, customer scorecards, and so on. So these are minimum requirements that should be considered for management review input. Of course, this clause is directly linked to management review output 9331. And basically what is important to say here that each auditor would want to see action developed for any KPI or measurable that's not meeting the target. So even though process owners should address customer performance issues related to the process they manage, this requirement gives top management the clear and ultimate responsibility to address customer performance issues, and with this to ensure the effectiveness of corrective actions. The common mistakes from my experience, the processes are not only manufacturing processes, but you have to consider QMS processes. So not only manufacturing, but all QMS processes that do have KPIs. So when measuring process effectiveness and efficiencies, we need to include review of those measurables. As I said, a monitoring system should be in place with criteria that trigger special unplanned management review activities. What I mean by that is that when there's no action no action plans in place, or reaction to not meeting target, you will face NCR and most likely majors. And I understand the customer is not always right, and there are limitations to what suppliers can do in certain circumstances, but you need to document what is the action plan and the status. You have to show diligence and care and document that in your management review. Do not just leave it as a part of doing business. Let's go to the next one, Holly. So number 11, control plan. I don't have to. It's needless for me to say that in this forum that control plans and FEMAs are probably most important documents in the automotive sector. So this section strengthened the control plan requirements and aligned IATF OEM customer specific requirements into the standard. It also elevated a note regarding customer approval to a requirement and strengthened the control plan review and update criteria and linked to the PFEMA updates. Control plans are needed for the relevant manufacturing site and all products supplied, and not just only for the final product or final assembly line, for example. Family control plans are acceptable for bulk materials and similar parts using common manufacturing process, but the share should be given to identifying the degree of differences that this application is. So basically you have to find a common control for all these processes that are for family of control plan parts. Common mistakes, error proofing in the control plan, and frequencies of verification and reaction plans. So we call them red rabbits in industry. So they have to be referenced in the control plan together with frequencies of verification. So also you have to include the assessment of the error proofing in the FMEA. You want to show that you understand the failure mode and effect, and that you've addressed those risks by designing and implementing error proofing device. You will of course reduce the RPN number by reducing the occurrence of the detection number. When we go on the floor, the verification log must be maintained as a record. So when operator does their verification, Red Rabbits runs, they have to maintain that as a record. What is important to say is also that companies should develop a process to identify the need for error proofing. So, you have to design the process over, you have to have a process over designing the error proofing and implementation. And the most common platform, from my experience, is APQP process. What I also want to link here, that error proofing devices must be identified, controlled, verified, and calibrated where feasible, as required by clause 10.2.4. So again, the most common practice is including them into the calibration system. That's a common mistake I see in the field. Probably the second most common pitfall to avoid is not cascading SCs through the documentation. The special characteristics and how do you plan to control them must be documented in the control plans. So the SCs are cascaded from drawings, process flows, FEMAs, control plans, down to the work instructions and SOPs. The SCs are not only customers, as you know, they can be internal, so there must be a multidisciplinary approach to establishing them, again, through a process. And again, the most common platform is APQP. Okay, let's jump to the next one, number 10. Excuse me, I had to take a sip of water. Supplier monitoring. The organization, they should continuously review inputs and introduce improvement actions regarding supply monitoring data as needed. Documented and non-documented customer disruptions and the number of premium freight occurrences need to be monitored. So we need to have a performance indicator provided by the customer and from the service, and they need to be included within the organization's supplier monitoring process. In this case, in this point, I would step back to the requirement of the ISO 9001 clause 8.4, control of externally provided processes, products, and services. So we need to determine the controls apply to all external suppliers, but not only of the raw material, but services as well. So that's a common thing that I see in the field. You guys do apply controls to your raw material suppliers, but not services. Of course, there's a requirement for organization to require their suppliers to develop, implement, and improve their quality system. So there's a sanctioned interpretation issued by IATF. So I encourage you to go to IATF site and read all those sanctioned interpretation. There's some clarifications on you know, what's the development progression for suppliers. You know, this approach basically supports the risk-based thinking. So based on the risk-based thinking, you know, the clients need to develop a criteria to develop their suppliers. So the minimum acceptable level of QMS development may be compliance to ISO 9000 through second-party audits or your audits, but that needs to be authorized by the customer. At this step, there's another FAQ on IATF website that I encourage you to visit as well. The FAQ require, here's the question. The standard requires second-party audits to be included in the supplier management. The organization needs to determine the criteria for determining the need, frequency, and depth of or scope of the second-party auditors. If there is a low risk within organization suppliers, are second-party audits required? What is the intent? So answer is, again, the risk-based thinking approach driven by ISO 9001 needs to be incorporated for supplier management. So you have to decide based on the criteria that you develop whether supplier audits are needed or not. Let's jump to the next one. Holly, so number 9, organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. So this requirement was already part of ISO 6949/2009. However, based on IATF survey feedback, the IATF adopted some modification to the requirement to address the need to document. So I highlight document assigned personnel responsibilities. So for example, personnel involved in selection of special characteristics, setting quality objectives and related training, corrective and preventive actions, product design and development, capacity analysis, scorecards, and so on. They all have to have a documented, they need to be documented as assigned personnel for these activities. What auditors are looking for are how the assigned personnel responsibilities and authorities are documented, as I say. So there are 4 principal ways in which responsibilities and authority can be documented. So you can put them in a organization org chart, organization structure charts, in job descriptions, in procedures, and so on. So the standard doesn't really stipulate how or which method should be used. You know, in very small companies, the lack of such documents defining responsibilities and authorities may not prove detrimental to quality, as it can be implied that people are aware of their responsibilities in a small companies and they're adequately trained. But however, if you're going to rely on training, there has to be some written material which is to be used for the training of this personnel, so it is consistent with the standard. Maybe a few more notes or points to make on this NCR. The top manager must primarily take accountability for the effectiveness of the QMS and understand that its success or failure depends on them. So engaging, directing, and supporting personnel to contribute to the effectiveness of the QMS and supporting other management roles to demonstrate the leadership in the areas of responsibility. So how can this be evident? Basically by identifying process owners who will be in charge of managing the process and related outputs, conducting management reviews in order to assess the condition and performance of the QMS and define necessary actions for improvement. So a mature QMS promotes a continual improvement of process owners, competencies, and the process owners basically learning from each other. Next one, Holly, please. Total proactive maintenance. So of course, this is not new, and this is development of the requirement that was already in ISO TS 16949. So this requirement is strengthened basically and requires equipment maintenance and overall proactive management of the total productive maintenance. So TPM, let's just quickly say TPM is a system for maintaining and improving the integrity of production and quality systems through machines, equipment, processes, and what is most important, employees. So that adds value to the manufacturing program. So the TPM should be fully integrated within the manufacturing process and any necessary support processes. So the TPM approach basically overlaps or blurs the distinction between the roles of production and maintenance by placing a strong emphasis on empowering operators to help maintain the equipment. So this approach creates a shared responsibility for equipment and basically encourages greater involvement by plant floor workers. So they own the equipment and they do care about what the equipment can deliver. So of course the result is improving productivity, increasing uptime, eliminating defects and scrap and so on. So the standard gives a few examples of appropriate KPIs for this, and one of them is OEE, mean time between failures or repair. But these are not mandatory. You can develop your set of metrics, and they're relevant to your operation and that will allow for optimum uptime and reduce waste. So this approach includes integrated preventive, what we call regular scheduled maintenance, and predictive maintenance. So a few examples of predictive maintenance, look at components that wear and replace them before they break. Document component known to regular failure and consider alternatives. What I often see in the field is thermography or vibration analysis to detect signs of equipment stress points. So you want to detect early failure or potential early failures. So of course the KPIs, trends, they have to be input to the management review, and any time the plan is not achieved, a document corrective action plan must be presented to the auditor. So you will most likely receive a non-conformance if something's read and it's not addressed. So engaging people and basically providing leadership to the floor. So show with your example, lead the group, and encouraging initiative and continual improvement from the bottom up. Those are takeaways for this clause. Number 7, standardized work, operator instruction, visual standard. So through this section, IATF strengthened the requirements for standardized work, including the requirements to address specific language needs as well. So standardized work documents need to be clearly understood by the organization's operators and should include all applicable qualities, safety, remember safety, that's often missed, and other aspects necessary to consistently perform each manufacturing operation. Needless to say, the standardized work should include the what, how, and why the tasks are performed. It needs to include all necessary information for the operator. The most common pitfall is not describing the frequencies and steps for error-proofing verification and the need to document the verification steps. So that's what I see the most often. So you want to include those steps in your SOPs. Also, it is expected or required that any special characteristic and critical characteristic, safety critical characteristic, is cascaded from drawings to this lower level document. So the training records must be available for the operator running the line. I just want to add that mature QMS systems prescribe standardized work not only at the floor level, but throughout all processes. So not only direct labor, but indirect labor and all the way up to the leadership. So that's probably something to consider when you develop your QMS. Number 6, quality management system documentation. So unlike ISO 9001, the IATF standard retained the quality manual as a requirement. And it was, as you probably know, removed from ISO. However, the quality manual can not only be one document, it can be a series of documents or multiple documents, it can be a hard copy or electronic. So there's some leeway there. So this section also requires that the organization process and interactions are documented as part of their QMS. So you want to make sure that you have a process map within as a document. There's also a requirement that quality manual needs to document where in the organization's QMS customer specific requirements are addressed. So again, I encourage you to go to IATF site, and there's a sanctioned interpretation and an FAQ issued for this to clarify a few things. So the quality manual shall include at a minimum, so matrix was crossed out. So matrix is not a requirement. You know, you can have a table, a list, or any way you think it's understandable for you, indicating where within the organization quality management system their customer specific requirements are addressed. So basic rationale for change, some organization wanted clarification that a matrix was not a mandatory document. So it is not a mandatory document. A common pitfall, it is important to note that the non-IATF OEMs, so non-IATF OEMs customers and other automotive customer may have customer requirement in an internal document that is shared with their suppliers. So those are usually, let's say, tier one companies that usually have supplier quality manuals and different documentations that do apply to suppliers. So you have to have a process to verify and apply these requirements. You have to understand, regularly review and apply these requirements as required. Just a few words on FAQ that's in IATF database, website. The question, does the document, which could be a table, list, or matrix, have to include non-IATF OEM and tier ones? Do all customer requirements beyond customer-specific requirements need to be included in the document? So answer, the organization is responsible for evaluating customer requirements, including customer-specific requirements, and including them in the scope of the organization's quality management system. A document, which could be, as I said, it could be a table, list, or a matrix, is required as part of the quality manual. The document shall include all direct customers of the certified organization, which may include IATF OEMs, non-IATF OEMs, and Tier 1 and Tier 2. So, for example, a Tier 2 organization must consider the customer requirements, including customer-specific requirements of all of its customers. So the Tier 2 organization does not need to consider the customer requirement of the automotive OEM if the OEM is not a direct customer. So they do supplier Tier 1, and they do not need to consider OEM unless specified by Tier 1. Okay, Holly. Number 5. Very often raised as a non-conformance. So it's a greatly enhanced requirement in this standard. Basically, the need for basically there's an enhanced need for organization to determine auditors' competency to make sure that the internal audit process is robust. Organizations need to establish a documented process that considers the competencies required by this clause and take actions to address any deficiencies, assess the effectiveness of actions taken, and record a list of the approved auditors. The clause differentiates between quality management system auditors, manufacturing process auditors, and product auditors, and clarifies basically competencies for each type of auditors. Again, please go to IATF website, where there's sanctioned interpretations for this requirement. Basically, what the sanction interpretation says is that the organization shall have a documented process to verify that internal auditors are competent, taking into account any requirement defined by the organization. So quality management system auditors, they must be able to demonstrate the minimum competencies in automotive process approach for auditing, including risk-based thinking, applicable customer-specific requirements, understanding of ISO and IATF requirements, and understanding the core tool requirements, automotive core tools, APQ, PSPC, MSA, FMEA, and PPAP. And of course, understanding how to plan and conduct audit. At a minimum, manufacturing process auditors shall demonstrate technical understanding of the relevant manufacturing processes. And at a minimum, such as FEMA and control plan and so on. At a minimum, product auditors shall demonstrate competence in understanding product requirements and relevant measuring and test equipment to verify. So they have to know, you have to show competence that whoever does the product audit, of course, knows how to use the test equipment. Just a couple more notes on this. The organization must assure that internal auditors' competencies are maintained and improved. So there must be a system in place to assure this. The standard prescribes a number of audits per year or additional training on core tools. I want to add here also a competence for second-party auditors. So second-party auditors, basically your auditors who are doing supplier, so who audit your suppliers. So you have to make sure that their competencies are also covered in a documented process. Next one, Holly, is risk analysis. So risk analysis 6121. Basically, the need to identify, analyze, and consider actual and potential risk was covered in all various aspects of previous standard. The IATF adopted additional requirements for risk analysis, recognizing the continual need to analyze and respond to the risk, and have suppliers organization consider specific risks associated with the automotive industry. Organizations would need to periodically review lessons learned from product recalls, product audits, field returns, very often missed, and repairs, complaints, scrap and rework, and implement any action plans in light of those of these lessons. The effectiveness of these actions should be evaluated and actioned in the management review. I want to add that a mature system should identify the organization's context and the environment where they operate. So this is all covered in ISO portion of the standard, so ISO 9000. The clause 4.1 and 4.2 of the ISO standard say that the company must determine the external and internal issues affecting the company's ability to achieve the intended results. They must also determine all interested parties that are relevant to their QMS and all their requirements. What I would like to link here is the planning portion of the standard, the clause 6. So all issues that are determined under 4.1 and 2 should be analyzed and using the risk approach and actioned as appropriate. So the analysis doesn't only cover the risk, but opportunities, of course. So the clause risk analysis should consider basically everything that you covered in previous clauses 4.1 and 4.2 and address them through a risk analysis exercise. So the best practice examples include different tools with severity occurrences and control steps. With severity occurrences and control steps similar to FEMA. And of course, the contingency plans are one of the direct results of these analysis. So basically try to link section 4.1 or clause 4.1 4.2 with the planning and then the risk analysis requirement of the standard. It's very nicely, in my view, very logical link. Next one, section, the third is manufacturing process design output. So what's changed here from the previous standard is that it basically strengthened the verification requirement. You know, the process input variables, the capacity analysis, maintenance plans, and corrections of process nonconformities. The clause clarifies that the process approach methodology of verifying outputs against inputs applies to the manufacturing design process. The list of manufacturing design outputs is also expanded, so it includes specifications and drawings, special characteristics, identification of process input variables, tooling, equipment, and production and control, capacity analysis, FMEAs, maintenance plans, control plans, and so on. So there's a long list of manufacturing process design outputs. So the mature standard include all these deliverables in their APQ, usually in their APQP tracking tool. What I'm saying here, that's not a mandatory, of course, it's a best practice to use APQP tracking tool to address the minimum required outputs. Of course, each of these tasks or activities or outputs is a multifunctional task and require due time for development. So you need to plan in your APQP process that you have resources to address the requirements. Please note that in this step, it's usually program launch. There may be different customer-specific requirements, and customer involvement and approval is very often required, especially if there's a critical characteristic or similar. So I want to say that this should be all covered in the matrix that we covered in the section 7.5.11 quality management system documentation. So that's the link to that. The second most frequent issue or NCR raised is MSA, measurement system analysis. And what's changed since the last standard version is that MSA records are now required for customer acceptance of each type of inspection, measurement, and test equipment identified in the control plan. So whatever you have in the control plan has to have MSA analysis evident. There's a need for customer to accept any alternative method, and that acceptance needs to be retained for audit. The previous requirement to analyze variation in measurement results is now extended specifically to inspection equipment. The IATF 6949 also clarifies that records of customer acceptance need to be retained, as I said. There is, please go to FAQ, IATF website to take a look at the FAQ. A quick question was raised. There are MSA studies required for each instrument or device? So the answer is no. A complete statistical study on each single piece of equipment is not required. Instruments with the same characteristics can be basically covered by one sample from that family. So let's say if you use 70 or 20 verniers on the floor, you don't need to do MSA on each single one, but to consider the range resolution for each vernier and group them in the families. So, you know, if you have smaller verniers with this resolution, bigger verniers with this resolution, micrometers with this resolution, and so on. Again, what I highlight here is that all equipment that are listed in the control plan must have MSA analysis done. So if MSA studies do not meet the requirement, and we all know requirements, GRNR bigger than 10% or kappa value for attribute R&R don't meet the requirements, there must be an action plan and recovery plan in place. So you must have that evident for the auditor. And finally, number one, the contingency plans. And as I noted previously in this, you know, when I covered the risk analysis, the expanded requirement ensures that the organization defines and prepares contingency plans along with a notification process to the customer or other interested parties. Organizations would first take a systemic approach to identifying and evaluating risk for all manufacturing processes, giving particular attention to external risk. Contingency plans would be developed for any of the outlined disruption conditions, you know, interruptions, let's say interruptions of externally provided products, processes, and services. You know, let's say recurring natural disasters in areas where they have tornadoes, fire, infrastructure-related disruptions. Everything needs to be covered in contingency plans. Again, customer notification is a mandatory step in any contingency plan, unless there is no risk to deliver non-conforming product or affect on-time delivery. There is a sanctioned interpretation on this topic as well in IATF website that includes cyber attacks on information technology systems. So this is an additional requirement that was added recently. So organizations need to address the possibility of cyber attacks that could disable the organization's manufacturing and logistics operations, including ransomware. Organizations need to ensure they are prepared in case of a cyber attack. A common missing element in the audits, at least I performed, was that the organization did not cover the new requirement that contingency plans must be periodically tested for effectiveness. So you need to test your contingency plan to make sure they're effective. And the second most common missing element was the cyber attack. So IATF 69, IATF standard is a standard, and it includes all these sanctioned interpretation as addendums to the standard. So please take some time and review all sanctioned interpretations that are on IATF website. They're available to everybody to review. I think that concludes my presentation. I think we're going to open the floor now, Holly.
Yeah, we'll just conduct one poll here, and we'll invite the folks on the webinar here to submit their response, and we'll share the results. So which of the following IATF 16949 requirements do you find the most challenging? So let me launch it here. You'll be able to select the response most appropriate for you. So perhaps it's, we just select the top 5 here. So contingency plans, measurement system analysis, manufacturing process design output, risk analysis, or internal auditor capacity. So we'll leave it open for about 15 seconds, and then we'll close and share the results. And then I believe we have some sort of general tips or recommendations to consider to ensure a successful implementation or maintenance. That's our next slide, Deshaun, and then we'll open it up for questions. We've got quite a few actually already.
Okay.
What do you expect would be the most challenging? Would it, in fact, be the number one contingency plans, or would you find folks struggle with others on this list?
I would say MSA, but I don't know. Well, let's see what people say. MSA is usual, but it's a very technical. People, you know, statistics is a science, so people don't understand sometimes, of course, the science behind variation and so on. There's a whole book that they need to read through before they can apply certain conclusions. So I would say MSA, yeah, but let's see what happens.
Yep. So unsurprisingly, 27%. So I'm just sharing the results here. 27% measurement systems analysis, followed by 18% contingency plans. So definitely in those two top ones.
Mm-hmm. So risk analysis 45, I can see that. So and this is and I'm not surprised. Why I'm not surprised? Because it's not a new requirement. It's just newly written, I guess. IATF wanted people to take risk analysis into considerations when they create their processes and everything. So, as I said, the best way to address this requirement is to link 4.1 and 4.2 from ISO standard, and to understand the interested parties, the risks surrounding the interested parties, and then basically create analysis of the risk that can basically impact the business. So that's 4.1, 4.2 linked to 6, and then create contingency plans for all those risks identified. You know, if you take a risk as a you know, you can take a risk and say I'm okay with this risk, and I'm okay because of this, and this. That's acceptable as well. So not every risk has to be removed from your horizon, I guess. But it needs to be identified. That's a must.
That's great. Thank you, Deshaun. So this is our last slide here, just sort of a sample of the top 10 NCRs, or 12, excuse me, beg your pardon, 12.
Yeah.
And our tips. And I'll let you run through these, Deshaun, and then we'll open up to Q&A.
So again, IATF standard, it basically what's emphasized throughout the standard is customer-specific requirement. This is why the standard needs you to have that matrix list table where you, within your quality management system, know exactly where a specific customer-specific requirement is addressed. So that's probably the first step of development of the quality management system. Internal auditors, of course, you need to have a process to review the customer-specific requirements. They change every day. They change very often, probably not every day, but they change very often. You have to have a process to address the dynamic of the industry. We know the automotive industry is very dynamic, and it changes very, very often. So you have to have a process in place to understand those changes, and then basically cascade those changes or apply those changes through your system, and then train your auditors to audit against those requirements. So that's a whole system in motion. It has to be linked from understanding the needs to auditing again, determining the gaps and auditing against the requirements. And ensure your team has deep understanding of how to perform internal audits and management reviews. Again, internal audits, it's very important, as I just said, it's very important, if you do internal audits just to satisfy the norm, that's not helping anybody. Your internal auditors need to understand the gaps between what's the desired level of the certain process, and what are the gaps that need to basically be closed between the current status and the desired status. So the best use for auditors is to raise non-conformances when they see those gaps, when they see those gaps are not addressed. Conduct the pre-assessment if needed. So we do offer pre-assessment if it is required. We can do a pre-assessment for any quality management system. This is only for new customers, unfortunately. That's the rule for IATF certification. But again, as I said, the understanding the gap between what it is currently and what it needs to be is probably the key to to addressing a successful quality management system. So basically, as you do your continual small steps to improve your QMS.
That's great. Thanks, Deshaun. That's a very insightful presentation. I've got a couple of questions here, so let me click through. I guess first question would be, some folks are asking the primary website to direct to for the IATF. So that's the globaloversight.org. Is that correct?
Yes, I can. Yes, it is. It's if you go to Google, I mean, it should be there first on. So IATF, when you click on IATF.org, yes, there's links to frequently asked questions. There are links to sanctioned interpretations. There are links to customer-specific requirements. There are some other useful things for you guys. So by all means, yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to send it up through the chat, folks, if you want to pick up the website there. Okay, on to questions here. So item number 10, or nonconformance number 10 that you went through, Deshaun, this is from Keith, supplier monitoring. From what perspective is this? The certified org monitoring their suppliers, and if so, which yard holds and customers disruptions? Does that make sense?
Can you rephrase it or put it on the screen? I'm not sure I understood the fully question.
Let me just reread here. So with regards to supplier monitoring, from what perspective is this? Is it the certified org, so the organization that is certified to the automotive standard, right? Monitoring their suppliers? If so, which yard holds customer disruptions? That does not make sense, Deshaun. I'm happy to get Kiki to send a follow-up, but...
Yeah, probably the gentleman used some abbreviation, so maybe he can... what I want to say here, again, why... it's not going to probably answer the question because he had direct questions about yard holds. What I want to give maybe answer from a higher perspective. You want to apply your risk analysis. So how much you're going to monitor your suppliers is based on your risk analysis. So of course you're not going to monitor the same your steel supplier as, I don't know, somebody who brings coffee to your office. It's not the same risk. But again, you as a company need to adopt a criteria for each of your suppliers and say, I need to monitor the suppliers and I'm going to use these tools to monitor these suppliers based on the risk that they have to my business. So that's a high level perspective on this section.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Many of the items sound very much aligned with the issues of QS 9000, ISO 9001, and AS 9000, or aerospace. Why is another standard really needed, or could the ISO 9001 be the document of leadership?
Yeah, that's a question. That's a little bit. That question is not technical, I guess, in nature so much. There's a lot of talks, I guess, when we go to down into Detroit, why there was a need for IATF, why IS had different branch. So this time around, I guess ISO 9001 is perceived as a foundation for all those standards. So anything that's specific to automotive, aerospace, medical, environmental, what else? Food, probably. They're basically developed in their own direction. So IATF, they had additional requirements that were not covered by ISO standard. So that's why they needed to basically expand upon having only one standard. Not the specific requirements of automotive industries were basically put on top of ISO. So you have to use both documents to satisfy the need. Yep. If I answered the question right, that's how I understood it, at least.
Yeah, feel free to send through a follow-up question, Phil, if that does not satisfy your answer there. With regards to the second non-conformance, most common, the measurement system analysis, if no customer specifies for bulk material suppliers, then is the MSA not a requirement then? Is that correct? So the MSA would not be a requirement if no customer specifies for the bulk material suppliers. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct. It's I'm not sure what the gentleman is referring to, or the person is referring to.
Sorry, I'll just comment, Deshaun. He's referencing APQP or PPAP manuals. Does that help?
To a degree. So the requirement is like this: whatever you have in the control plan has to have MSA done. So I'm thinking bulk material. So let's say nuts and bolts probably would fall under that category. I'm sure that you have some thread gauges, that you have some inspection devices that do show up in your control plan. So they do have to have MSA done. That's a requirement. So there's no really way around that.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Risk analysis should be addressed at a process, quote unquote, level. Is that correct? Meaning the effects of uncertainty, risk, at each process in terms of impact to goals and objectives. Is that correct?
That's an approach, and it's a best practice. But again, IATF doesn't specify how. So I like that. That's a great approach that you guys have. If somebody is proposing that. And I saw that basically companies basically address risk at each process, but that's not a requirement.
Yeah, okay. Can you comment how to best use turtle diagrams, or what your thoughts or feelings are on that, Deshaun?
I like it because, it helps, automotive process approach. So you have your inputs, you have your outputs, you have how you do things, what methods you use, what KPIs you have, who's responsible for what. So it basically, on a small piece of paper, basically clarifies exactly what goes into the process. So I like that approach. It's not the only one that people, or tool I should say, it's not the only one that auditors use, but it's the one that I use. So I like it. So.
Okay. Can you provide an example of how to prove that an internal auditor's capacity has been improved?
I would say competency, probably, not capacity.
Okay.
So our internal auditor competency improved. Again, internal auditor is somebody who needs to understand IATF. He needs to understand the customer requirements. He needs to understand core tools that we use in automotive industry. They need to understand the environment they operate within. So internal KPIs and everything. So their competencies can be improved by of course training, by setting the levels of competencies for different auditors. Probably not each internal auditor can audit management review. I wouldn't expect somebody to have the same insight into management review as as somebody who's, let's say, a manager. So you have to develop your auditors in such a way that that you use them for the best process. They're for the closest process they're with. So let's say somebody who's in manufacturing would probably be a good auditor for manufacturing process, because they know exactly what to look for, what to what to address in their audits. So again, there needs to be a development process for each auditor's role, in such a way that you have a cross representation and you have cross application of auditors. Not only one auditor can see all the things that are maybe visible to somebody else. So that's my answer to that.
Okay, thank you. So sort of an extension on that is, how do we effectively retain as well as demonstrate that we have retained organizational knowledge when senior team members leave?
Yeah, that's a common topic that I see when I do audits. I'm I would say closer to retirement than you know, my early years. So what I see usually in the plants is a very, very mature and somewhat green team that try to work together. So of course, I don't have to repeat you that somebody who with 30 years of experience in materials or maintenance or engineering, you have to find a way to transfer all that organization knowledge to somebody who's just starting into that role. What's the best way to do it? Several tools I can think of in this 5-minute lessons learned. Training sessions, making sure that the management teams, I don't want to say only management, but the teams are learning from each other. They're engaged in the APQP meetings where you have multitask representation, I guess, multifunctional representation. So make sure that the engagement and between people is there. How to document all that is probably with lessons learned. Lessons learned can be an FMEA. FMEA is a great tool that's underutilized in many companies, because it's used only in many occasions, used only when we have a customer reject their change. We should probably look at expanding FMEAs and basically making sure that is updated whenever we have a change of requirement, of change of application of certain error proofing and so on. So that's my answer to that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. What are your thoughts on utilizing auditors from an external source, or outsourced rather, to conduct internal audits?
I don't like it. I know that people try to save money with that, and I understand. I was once in a company that had that approach. I don't like it because external auditors are usually basically, they're sampling. They have input of, very limited sampling numbers. Really, they will spend 1 or 2 or 5 days at your place and will go and basically probably come back again in a year. So I think you're missing on effectiveness of auditing if you use external auditors. You're probably just satisfying the norm or the requirement of the standard to have an internal audit. I think that using internal auditors who understand the systems inside out is the best way to do internal audits. So it's an investment for companies. I understand that. It's investment in training. It's investment in the resources usually. But at the end of the day, you should see benefits from that in reduced probably scrap, reduced waste, reduced anything that basically is detrimental to the quality of your products.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I don't like it. Of course it's allowed. No issues with that. So.
Yeah. Okay. We design product, then outsource manufacturing, the testing, and delivery to customers. I understand that only companies with manufacturing lines can be certified to IATF. Obviously, they don't. So, what are the options for this organization if they want to supply parts?
Yes, that's true. Only manual.
So they did want to.
They can be ISO certified.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, they can be ISO 9001 certified. They only companies that produce or manufacture products can be IATF certified. Yes, that's the rule.
Okay. So ISO would be the alternate, I guess.
ISO 9001 2015. Yes.
Okay. Alrighty.
If this is manufacturing, then you could be different. It could be medical, could be. So again, ISO 9000. I'm not sure about other. Oh, gentlemen is probably referencing IATF. So I would say ISO 9001. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me just have a see. We are a service supplier, warehousing for tires for an IATF certified company. as part of their requirements, they are asking us to be IATF 6949 compliant, excuse me. We are ISO 9000 certified. However, we don't have any manufacturing, so only the warehousing. So should we go about determining what extent, or for the clauses? So obviously not to become certified, just to be compliant. What's the recommendation or
it is,
guidance?
you know, yeah, that depends on your customer. So your customer will have to tell you, and you know, we went back to supplier monitoring and risk-based analysis for supplier monitoring, and they basically IATF requirement is for your customer in this case to push you through the progression and, you know, get you to have a QMS, a certified QMS system through a third party. Now, you know, it is up to them to, based on the risk they see in you, to determine what is the minimum level for your certification. So if the minimum level for your certification is to be ISO 9001 compliant, then that is okay. But they have to basically document that in their risk analysis. So that's that. So I think I understood your question. So, you know, you don't have to be IATF certified. Of course, you're just service provider, so you're not entitled for IATF, or you're not eligible for IATF because you're not manufacturing. So ISO 9001, you can certify to ISO 9001, but the minimum requirement for you can be compliance to ISO 9001 achieved through second-party audit. So your customer would come in and audit you against the ISO 9001. But again, that's their decision.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deshaun. We're at the top of the hour, and that's all of our questions. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in to our webinar today. Deshaun, thanks very much for your presentation. Very much appreciated. And have a great day.
Thanks.